Yeah, and actually we're gonna turn this into more of a conversation too, right? So we're gonna have an engaging time this afternoon. Everybody good? The first year of the independently owned and operated GamesBeat Summit. Let's give a round of applause for the GamesBeat team. So awesome. So again, my name is Chris Melasinos. I'm the principal evangelist for video games at AWS, and I have the privilege of sitting with my colleagues here who are much, much smarter than I am to talk about the use of AI in game development. And of course, there's so many different opinions about how do we use it, what does it mean to leverage AI in development, in the production, the distribution, the operation of the games that we make and the art that we bring to the world. And so we're going to dissect some of that and hear a bit more about how they are using AI in their game development process. So what I would like to do is I would like to start with Jamity. Maybe you can give folks in the room a quick overview of the type of games and things that you're building at Jamity.
Sure. Wait, no.
Here, you take that, and I'll take that.
There we go. Hi, I'm Aaron. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO at Jamity Studios. We are not quite 2 years old, and we are exploring how we can create novel gameplay by the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence to games. So we are focusing on machine learning AI in the game loop. And our first experiment we released last November called Retail Mage. It's in Steam.
Retail Mage, that sounds pretty exciting. Can you tell us what Retail Mage is?
Retail Mage is late stage capitalism coming for Diagon Alley. You are a employee of MageMart. You have 30 minutes to close and in come a bunch of crazy customers. You're in a kind of like magical IKEA-inspired space, so there's a bunch of different like showcases, and you have to solve these customers' requests, hopefully in very creative ways, and they will give you 1 to 5 star reviews. And so those characters are AI, have a bunch of AI systems. So we have AI NPCs, and we can talk about that with dynamic dialogue. But we also have an AI world model that allows us to have an have an interaction model. So you can go up to any object in the world, you can type or say what you want to do, and we'll try to make that happen.
Awesome. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. And then how are you? Talk to us a bit about Hidden Door and what you all create and deliver.
Happy to. Hi, everybody. I'm Hillary Mason, the founder and CEO of Hidden Door. And what we do is create immersive experiences for fans to role play inside of worlds that they love, from books, movies, TV shows, or really anywhere where someone has done a lot of thoughtful, creative world building work. We partner directly with those folks, so we license the work. And then we create a role-playing experience where fans have a card-based world-building experience where they get to create their own characters. They get to set up what they want to play with, the people, the things, the places they want to go inside of those worlds, and then they get to zoom in and have a first-person role-playing experience from the perspective of the character they created. And we think a lot about how to create something that feels both open-ended and creative, and yes-anding you in the way that a really great tabletop session does, or a really great improv show. And we think a lot about how to also create the constraints and the boundaries that make it a game, and that also create that sense of like real immersion in that world and what it means to be in one world versus another world. My background is in machine learning, so I did a PhD in machine learning in the early 2000s, created a company in 2014 called Fast Forward Labs, where we did applied machine learning research and prototyping and product code development, and did a bunch of work in natural language generation back in that era of the tech that was pre-transformer models. And then actually went and built alongside customers a bunch of products using a variety of techniques, mostly not in games at that point. Matt, who's here, and I started Hidden Door about 5 years ago, out of the idea that the best use of this tech that we had seen yet would be really reimagining how people are fans of the things that they love. And that's what we've been working on ever since. And the latest version, the latest game will go into early access middle of this summer. So if you want to play it, go ahead and sign up on our website, hiddendoor.co, or find one of us. We'll happily give you a demo. We're pretty excited about it.
So how many people in the room are currently using AI or exploring AI in your production pipeline? Raise your hands. A couple, okay. How many of you that are exploring it in your production pipelines are actually using it in your deployed games or the management of games that you currently have out there? Okay, so we have 2. Okay, very good. Thank you for that. So now we know how you're thinking about it, or at least starting to explore AI. Ashley, maybe you can also tell us a little bit about the work that you do and the work that AWS does around AI and the type of AI tools that speak to the needs of game development.
Yeah. Hey everyone, my name is Ashwin Nagaraman. I'm a senior solutions architect at AWS. Worked at AWS for 8 years, 5 of which being in the games industry. If you're not familiar with AWS, we're a cloud computing platform.
Small startups, so if there are any investors in the room that have,
Well played.
So we provide things like compute, networking, storage, and databases, but it's not just really limited to that. There's also all sorts of AI features. So part of my job is to figure out from games industry and game developers how they're incorporating this technology into their games, but also distilling that into industry guidance that we can bring and learning from AWS's sort of large swath of customers out there, trying to educate everyone on what we see as best practice. So nice to meet everyone. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. So, okay, so yes, when you're talking about having access to all of these tools, and with it all changing so fast, so rapidly, we're seeing constantly new services, new applications, new experimentation of AI in game development. It can be very difficult to figure out what you should be looking at, how you get started, how does it fit in traditional game development pipelines. So I would ask my panel of experts here, just getting started, looking into AI, like what should I be thinking about? Am I going to have the big make my game button that I smack and out pops a game and off you go? Or is it a bit more nuanced than that? Where do I start on that beginning journey of utilizing generative AI?
I mean, I assume you're asking that as a provocative question, right?
Me? No, pardon me.
No, there is no one button. I'm glad you used the phrase generative AI because I think it's really important to define what we're actually talking about here. And as you may have determined from my intro, like I'm an old person, and therefore when I say AI, it actually means a wide variety of techniques, right? But what brings us all together is the hype around generative AI, largely around transformer models, large language models, image generation models. And so specifically, the question is, I think, like, what are these actually good for, right? Like, I think that's what we're getting to here. And I am a tremendous optimist, but also a pragmatist. So defining what we're talking about, what we are talking about is a set of technologies that hoover up all this data, build a compressed representation of relationships between bits in that data, and then on demand can spew out things that look like aspirationally the most mediocre inputs to that data, right? Like AI is generative AI, LLMs, they are not trying to be uniquely brilliant. That would be failure. They are trying to be mediocre at their best. And if we understand that, you can start to see like, okay, where can this actually be useful to me? Because honestly, a lot of the stuff we do is like taking advantage of mediocrity, taking advantage of the fact that people are really alike and they like the same things, and that in our case, like every beat of a romance novel is, the same first act, same second act, same third act, same fourth act, right? So if we understand what the technology is and then think about the player experience we're trying to create, we can actually do some amazing stuff. And no, it is not a big red like make me a game button exactly. But it is something that then lets us ask questions about, okay, our cost functions have changed for certain things. Our capability functions have changed. What we can let our players do have changed. Now, what is the creative experience we can come up with and try? And maybe we can build that a little faster than we could have before, right? So it is not that black and white question of like, AI, make me a game. Like, actually, you will get a game. It'll just suck, and that's fine. it is a much more nuanced question of what can I do with this that I couldn't do before, or where I might have wanted to do it before, but the cost function didn't make sense. Like one of our guiding star experiences is like, what if the author of your favorite fictional book could come sit across the table from you and GM a game for you and your friends, and they were a good GM, and you could afford to pay them to do this, and they wanted to do it, and they were in a good mood and well caffeinated. like that is something that can guide us towards a gameplay experience. It's not something that is sort of a like make me a game moment.
Can I just want to, that was great. I want to chime in actually that I do think, if we're, sorry Chris, we're jumping a little further, but if we do think like a little bit of like what does it bring, I actually agree with Hillary. There is a sort of argument that from one of the areas that could impact the market is that we have types of entertainment that are currently supply constrained, right? You don't have enough good game masters. And what this does is it changes that equation. We unlock the supply. The example I sometimes give is that the technology film allowed us to scale theater entertainment into a different type of market. So what type of entertainment is it that a supply demand that we can now meet the supply constraint, that we can meet that demand? And our argument is it very much like what Hillary is, it's this improvisational kind of experiences, a participatory type of experience that existed, that does exist, but we haven't had the technology to bring it into the digital domain to its fullest extent until now.
So to your question, right, like how do you get started? I think one of the things that we like to think about generative AI is that it's magical and it's always automated, but when making decisions on tool choice, we're actually still firmly in the world of human capability. So there's different levels of tools that are meant for certain developers that are data scientists and have the ability to really dive into data science and dive into code. But at the same time, there's developers that maybe aren't that technology focused, and they want to just incorporate this technology into their game, into their experience. So I think that's one thing where humans are still strongly in the equation.
Could I briefly, to actually answer the question you asked, Chris, was the quick advice I would have is that you need to focus on, don't throw away your old tools, right? We're not, like, I don't think we're not yet ready to, if we will ever be, hit a button, get a game. So it's like, I have a repertoire of tools. What does this add to it? Where does it fill in gaps I don't have? But I'm not throwing away all the old ones. So I need a return on investment. At the same time, I would encourage people not to prematurely optimize. I know the costs are scary. That's why we have wonderful partners like this who can help us navigate those costs. They really did help us.
Right?
I didn't,
they can help you guide you through that.
But I would also encourage people to build their own tools right now. And if you're not up for that, then you may need to rethink it. If we had this conversation a couple months ago, we wouldn't have been talking about MCP as a potential technology in the tool chain. And now that's you would absolutely use that technology. If you're not familiar with it, I would recommend you looking it up. So the tooling is moving quickly, so right now you have to get your hands dirty. And if that is prohibitive, then you need to think about where we are in the market. But again, we have partners that can sometimes help us build those tools, because you're not going to get, it's people in this conference that are helping to build those tools. They're still coming to market, right? So if you're jumping in on that production side and getting started, be prepared to build some of your own tooling and infrastructure.
Okay, so when we're talking about approaching AI tools and LLMs to help us solve some of these things that we're discussing here, I mean, what really is the difference between one LLM and another? Like, don't they all just kind of do the same thing? Like, why do we need these specialty ones? Like, how do I even know which ones to think about using, or the types of problems that they are best positioned to solve for?
I mean, you mean the OpenAI little pick a model thingy is not completely intuitive and doesn't make complete sense
Well,
to you?
I mean, I wasn't.
No, I mean, the differences between LLMs are largely around what is the training data, and then what are the architectures, and then what have they been processed to optimize for. And I'm using a generic term there because there are a variety of processing methods, like human-in-the-loop reinforcement learning for quality of results. There's trying them out on code emulation and putting that back in. People use a variety of techniques for that. And then there's things like, how big is the model? How many parameters? Does that even matter? Is it, like, I think you can do a heck of a lot with like a highly quantized compact model running in RAM that you couldn't do a year ago. But you would need to understand what your trade-offs are in terms of quality of output and reliability, and what are you going to build around it to make it do what you want it to do. So it's nuanced.
Okay. Where do I go from here? Okay, so what you're also then describing are small language models, correct? In that being able to go ahead and bring a model that is highly focused, that runs locally, in a tightly nested loop of data and interaction. I mean, how does that differ from using an LLM?
So I really try and keep my pedantry and perfectionism like in a very narrow part of my life, but there's actually a difference between a quantized and made smaller large language model versus a small language model. And again, that doesn't matter for this discussion. It is super interesting. What I think the point that is probably interesting to the people in the room is one that it is kind of a mess, right? The field is a mess. The tech is a mess. If you feel like it's a mess, like I feel like it's a mess, and I think most of the time I sort of know what I'm talking about, but also, so how do we navigate that as people who want to use it and want to do interesting things with it? And I would strongly say, like, try and understand it at a conceptual level. That is, like, what goes in, more or less what happens to it, and then what do we see come out? And develop a mental model of that so that when something surprises you, you can check it, you can update that mental model, you know what it's gonna be good for and not good for. And we were just talking about this in the hallway. Like, it is so hard to build this skill set or hire the people to do this, in games in particular, because you do not want people with machine learning PhDs. And I can say that here. Like, these are the people who will be like, what is the objective function that your game is optimizing? And it must be like, and I'm not joking. Like, people ask me this question a lot. And the answer is like, none. It's fun. And they come back and want to play it more, and it makes them happy. And they tell us cool stories about what they did with it. And this makes machine learning PhDs like really mad because we can't win. It is a culture of, I get it goes from 0.01 to 0.02, and I write a paper about that and I win. And so these are not the people you want building gameplay experiences. On the other hand, you have people, and this is not anyone's fault, but like immersed in the hype of like, just do a bunch of ChatGPT API calls and everything's gonna be fine. And we can tell you it is not gonna be fine. So it is really thinking about that, and how do we in this room, as the people who are able to think about and empathize with, like, what is the player's experience gonna be? What is that joy for them? What is fun? And then what are all of these tools I have in front of me? How do I possibly use them? And then how do I account for things like players who are gonna try and break everything, or operational issues, or like I can't scale, or it turns out I made something amazing and now I can't afford to run it. So like, it's all
Wait,
that stuff.
are you saying that gamers don't follow what you intended them to do, and they will intentionally try to break every freaking edge of your game? Is that
I have learned personally so much about different kinks based on what people try and do in our game, and like, it is very educational.
Yeah, well, I mean, we also saw recently, I don't know if anyone kind of saw the Darth Vader in Fortnite, right, issue there, right, which also speaks to, it doesn't matter how many guardrails we put in place or the things we think players are going to do, because, as you pointed out, you can't quantify fun, you can't quantify intent, right? And so even if you could create, incredibly well-crafted code and it's efficient and it looks like it's doing everything you want, it still can't tell you, yes, this is fun and this is what people want to go and do. And that is the inextricable kind of human element of all of this that technology just can't answer for, because it is innately not human.
Yeah, I'd add that, echoing a little what you said, Hillary, is that advice for those working in the space is that you need to lean in. Right, lean into the technology. In some cases, hallucinations mean creativity. right? In fact, we have a unique, I used to argue that like games were one of the unique industries in which we could get this technology out to market faster than others, because I wasn't going to drive somebody off a cliff, swap out their blood, type, or, mess up their vacation. We can roll with the punches in so many creative ways, right? We do smoke and mirrors in games all the time, right? But that means you have to have an intuition of what this technology is. And as alluded to in some of the earlier AI games panels, because there have been a couple, is that we're still, it's old wine in new bottles was mentioned before, right? There's a temptation still for us to say, like, I know how these patterns work and I'm going to just apply them again. And I would argue that it may not even be just a new genre, it may be a new medium that we're starting to explore, or pushing the bounds of what our medium has ever been before. And that means it's going to take us some time to get used to it, and deep understanding of the technology and a creative application of it is what we're calling for.
The experimentation component of learning how to use these tools is vitally important to figure out how to use them to their best effect, not only to achieve the goals you want, but also to do all the way out at the edge, protecting your players and protecting those communities. And so, one of the things I would love for you to talk a bit about, Bedrock being kind of this playground for LLMs, and being able to experiment there so people can understand how to best select or employ these tools for the things they need to achieve. So can you talk a bit about kind of our approach to Bedrock, and again, playing around with those LLMs in that space?
So Bedrock's our managed service for building, training, and fine-tuning large language models on AWS. Like my two panelists here have been saying, there's not really a direct science into figuring out which model works best for you. It's sort of like Aaron keeps saying, you keep up with the tech, keep understanding what these models are capable of, and also tools are getting built around us. One example from Bedrock that I can think of is just like model evaluation, right? Like that capability to take a single prompt and evaluate multiple models didn't exist a while ago, or you had to build it yourself, and it would cost a ton of money to send off all these requests. But now we can centralize that function through a platform like Bedrock, and we can democratize that ability so that game developers or any industry can actually find the model that works best for their use case. And if needed, they can do things like quantizing models and make them smaller, so that way we're not asking about Donald Trump in video games and things like that.
I mean, one of the examples of an experiment that was done by one of our colleagues was this gentleman, Banjo. He took 8 different models and then he basically hooked them into Street Fighter 2 and had them play against each other to see which model was most effective at winning a particular round. And what was really interesting about the experiment was it was pulling certain combos and draws that aren't typically done. And so the thesis around that was, man, this is a wonderful way to accelerate, let's say, QA testing against a game where you have to do these repetitive tasks. The thing that it can't tell you is it fun, right? And so you still are not going to remove, right, that human component from the loop, but it can remove the undifferentiated heavy lifting of that repetitive task, repetitive testing, right, in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I'll say you will end up, if you're heavily doing this, you will end up needing a tool or a framework similar to Bedrock or SageMaker. You can build a lot of it on your own. I would advise you not to, having done that, and then having to then migrate stuff over. And that's because, so we have an internal leaderboard. We use foundational models, so we use open weight models. Behind Retail Mage, we run large language models in the cloud on AWS's infrastructure. We have an internal process where we regularly take the latest large language models, we run them through a leaderboard process to identify how they score. As an example, when we were prototyping Retail Mage, there's a lot of details here, but when we were prototyping Retail Mage, for the longest time we were using Mistral and Llama, and then we went through the process one more time. Thought Qwen2 was going to win, Qwen2, but Gemma 2 won in the leaderboard. So Retail Mage uses Gemma 2, which I had no idea that, I did not expect that, because we built out a test framework and we were constantly having to test it. So this is an ongoing operational cost for us to continue to develop. And having the kind of, so that means there's infrastructure. That's a lot of models to manage. We've also built out tools that allow us to do, there's some folks that have said like you can't do automated testing with this technology. I contend that you can, but it is complex. It's not straightforward. And so we have automated tests against our AI machine learning, both automated tests against our AI machine learning fundamental like functions. We are now doing essentially AI automated tests against our AI NPCs. We call them T readings. And it allows us to do things that also check to see like, well, when we use this model, they all get more violent for some reason. Why is that? And some of it can be the training data, right?
Because you used a Mortal Kombat LLM.
Yes.
And
I mean, actually, it took us a long time to get a large language model to get angry enough to choose violence, which is a whole thing around guardrails. Is an interesting conversation in this industry too.
We also put a lot of work into making our NPC characters murder our players. Like, they do not want to,
we are making murder bots. Yes,
Yes.
that is the takeaway.
Chekhov's gun, Chekhov's burning building.
Have you not watched any science fiction at all? Like
Well,
Maximum Overdrive,
maybe,
right?
but I think it is like actually a really interesting question for this room, right? Because in games, we often want violence, or in our case also we want romance. Like, we want that character that you made to like hit on you in the right way, respectfully, and encouraging your career aspirations. But at the same time, if you do try to plug in an OpenAI model or a Claude model, all right, I haven't tested this on Gemini lately, so like I don't know, like they will refuse, but even worse, the later models will like kind of go there, but not really. And so we ended up with these stories that are just going on and on and on. And we're like, will you murder me already? It's supposed to happen. It's part of the mythos. And this is a need of the industry that the broad AI industry is actually actively working against. So I think it is an interesting question for this room to say, how do we create safe, comedic, or not even comedic, but like safe violence, sex, all these things that these models are being trained against, but that we can control and manage for our players. And I say this with the other side of this being, if it is not safe, if it is abusive or harmful, or someone's doing suicidal ideation, how do we responsibly handle that so that we can ensure that every player is as safe as we can possibly make them? And I think this is a real important issue for us in this room.
And we're going to talk a bit about the guardrails that some tools and technologies are trying to help provide, right? To maintain safety in community, safety, for kids that are playing online. Do you want to talk a little bit to some of those tools that we've seen that are being used for those use cases? How about that? Was that clear enough for you? Let's talk about some of those use cases.
Well, if you go up one floor and go down the hallway, you'll see Modulate's booth with their ToxMod solution. It's a pretty good voice toxicity detection model. But there's a lot of different use cases for machine learning for protecting your communities. I think it's really lived in traditional machine learning for a long time now, in terms of transcribing players' voices and running that through evaluation models and outputting a score, right? It's a very classical machine learning use case. But I think when you start thinking about Roblox and user-generated content, the amount of things that you need to be able to detect and understand, in a sort of localized fashion, why that is unacceptable for a certain age range or demographic, that's when it starts becoming harder and harder, which is where large language models really start helping us create these classification models that can actually detect a significantly larger amount of anomalies or transgressions that we want to remove from games.
And then you confuse them entirely with Skibbity and Riz and all of that stuff that gets fed into the models. And then it spits us for us, and we're like, I can't parse this. All right, but in all seriousness, so there's the kill you problem, right, of moderation. You ingest all of this data, and you find that somebody that's playing said, oh my God, I am going to kill you next time I see you. what the hell does that mean, right? Is it two people that have been playing video games together for 20 years and they're friends? It's like, I cannot believe you beat me in this game. Oh my God, brother, I'm gonna kill you when I see you. Versus a legitimate threat. Again, is the over-reliance on AI also a problem when we're dealing with toxicity and contextual understanding of human language? Look, both mics, by the way, went to Hillary immediately, right?
I mean, I have a total cop-out of an answer, which is like we have done extensive game and user experience design to avoid that, in that we don't have players in an open chat on our platform. And that is not to say it is not a problem, but I just want to say, like, there are plenty of ways to think about product design, game design, that can encourage behaviors, and particularly, like, I have a dark history in social media. I was one of the people on the founding team at Bitly, like short links on the internet, like way back in the day before we knew how toxic social media was. I was the chief scientist there, spending a lot of time thinking about how ideas spread online and how we could build products around that to, you know, discover interesting things. And I have many, many stories about it, but that was where, you know, I really started looking at different platforms and why is Twitter so much more toxic, even then, like back in 2010 when it first started, than something like Tumblr at the time, right? And it's because Tumblr had this design where if you said something and I wanted to crap on it, I had to bring it over into my feed to do so, but it didn't impact your feed, your followers never saw it. Whereas Twitter, of course, is the opposite design. And we know which one, you know, spreads information quicker and which one scales faster, but there is a real cost to that product design. So I'm just gonna say that we have a space for thinking through game design and product design that can help with this problem. The second thing you're bringing up is that often these communities are deeply toxic and companies do not wanna pay for moderation staff at the scale necessary to solve the problem. And so is AI then a blessing in that it helps with this problem? And like Roblox did release, I believe it's open source, a tremendous classifier for toxicity, right? They have a big, very talented team working on this problem. Or is it the other thing? I think generally it helps, but if you come in with the idea that AI is just gonna solve toxicity in communities, like it's going to fail. But if it is one tool that can more quickly highlight problems for a human person to manage, it is good. And then I think there are also places where we could detect things like bullying or suicidal ideation that may not use the exact words we would search for in a keyword filter, using a classifier that could then have a set response, like here you should call it, like here's the suicide hotline, right? And these are things that we can actually use AI broadly.
I think it also brings up an interesting question around our intuition of this technology. Because our tolerance for machine learning and AI making mistakes is lower than our tolerance for humans making mistakes, right? I mean, I see the Waymos driving around. They are way better drivers than many, many other of my human drivers sitting around me. Yet the moment, you know, a Waymo does something wrong, like it's gonna make the news, understandably, right? And so the question often then is, are we letting, you know, perfect be the enemy of good? And are there tools where we can still put them in place where we can effectively still make a better total outcome while still keeping often humans in loop, more judgment? Like it's another tool. Just because it is not a perfect tool is also the truth that your customer support team or your moderation team is not a perfect tool. But then you need to understand what that tool is, how to mitigate it for it. You know, good engineers look for failure cases. We don't just assume we're not going to ship without bugs or the network will always stay up. So then what are we doing to create resilience in our systems?
All right. So shifting from this, and there is no easy pivot here, but we're just going to go ahead and try, which also I've got a great Waymo story for you later. Literally yesterday, it cut us off in a left-hand turn lane and started honking at us. And we're like, what the hell are you? You just literally cut in front of us in a red light.
They used the violent model that
They
day.
did. They did.
They were-
Yes, we need, exactly.
They were
Do
well trained on real driving.
Exactly. It was using a New York model in LA. So, All right, so now when we're talking about, one of the, I think, easiest or most approachable use cases for AI that we hear all the time is generating images, generating content, generating meshes, right? There are wonderful places in which those tools serve in the design, but there is this tension about actually bringing those art assets into the world, right? So I know some of the things that we've worked on internally have been about things like mood board and ideation. Can you speak a little bit to that type of application of graphical assets being generated by AI tools?
I mean, again, to Aaron's point at the very beginning, I think, and even probably in one of the previous AI discussions, like AI gives you the ability to have a massive amount of permutations of a particular thing. Is it good at picking the one that humans like the best? Like, not so much, right? So that's where AI becomes a tool in your tool belt. In that, you want to see that many permutations. You want to understand what that affects about your player base, or what people enjoy about that particular design. And that's where mood boarding comes in, and that's how you use these large language models as a tool, and not just the tool, but like one of the tools in your tool belt. So it helps accelerate that time to production, or time to having a model or image that you really like, and your players will also really enjoy.
So then it doesn't necessarily replace the artist that goes back in and then creates those things, but actually can help you trial a whole bunch of different styles, types, environments, density of meshes, these sorts of things to figure out what fits.
Completely.
Right. But now we have the tension of delivering games into the world that may include these. So can the both of you speak to some of either that tension or observation that you've had about AI-generated art that then makes it past or outside of the pre-production phase into production?
I mean, we don't use AI-generated art in our game platform, and that is, I am both a, somewhat creative person and a technologist, but also a CEO, so I have a psychopath hat I can put on. So even putting on that hat and thinking about the overall experience, we have not found that is the experience we want to create. However, we do dynamically assemble hand-drawn bits of art into the right image. And I feel like this is a nuance we can tease out a bit, because an AI would not generate the right, like SVG, or the right piece of art. But when our art team does that, then we can use embeddings in this case, which is just a way of calculating a relationship between, in our case, it's words, but you can do it through different images as well, to say that, like, if a player's like, I want the, goth barista, in this sci-fi setting, and they're heartbroken, we can then go pull the art pieces that are pre-made that are closest to that description. And is it perfect? No, but it is stylistically absolutely consistent. And I feel like this is not something everyone should copy, and we probably wouldn't build it exactly this way if we were building it today. But I wanted to share it as an example of a way in which we're not saying like no machine learning in the art process at all, but one in which we're thinking a lot about the visual experience at the end, and then how do we get to that most efficiently given the assets we have, the time we have, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the choice we've made is very similar to Hillary's. We also do not use generative AI art in our production products. Retail Mage has a bunch of art in it. It's all 3D. It's in Unreal. That is all marketplace assets or commissioned art that we had. That was also an ethical choice that we had. I will say two comments on that. One is, again, on the tools that we have on hand and where does AI come in. Like, the argument I've made sometimes is, not to say that it may not get there, but right now, if we're looking at like, what tools do I have? Well, like there are a lot of great art outsourcing teams, or I can hire an art outsourcing team. Like, the cost of getting an amazing art library is, compared to generating that art right now, to have it consistent, to be honest, I'll take the outsourcers right now. Now, I think the challenge to that, so it's maybe a bit of a cop-out, because it's like right now, well, like, even if I was a psychopath, I would.
They didn't give you the hat.
They didn't give me the hat. No, I'm only the CTO. So, maybe I still would, like, because the quality is maybe not there, it's easy, it's maybe a bit of a cop-out. So, go forward a few more years, I think that challenge is still there. And so the other part that we look at is, again, we're trying to apply this technology in ways that create something new and novel that we couldn't do before, right? That no human, no narrative designer, no particular, anyone could create what we're doing. And we're trying to apply that technology in that way.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a key differentiator in that whole process, right, or the thing that we should think about when utilizing these tools, it is about taking some of in some cases, the undifferentiated components of that creative process and getting it out of the way. It's automating in some ways the scaffolding that allows an artist, a writer, somebody doing a level designer experience to be able to then come into something without having to build all the pieces from the bottom, right, up. And so you basically give them the opportunity to create more art, more story, because you've removed some of those pieces. It doesn't replace the artist, right? It accelerates their output. It accelerates their efficiency, or it can. In some cases, it can also, if you're not careful and you don't check your own biases, you're gonna be like, oh, that's exactly what I imagined. No, it's not exactly what you imagined. It's kind of like if somebody goes into a fortune teller with $20 in their hand stretched out, you're already primed to believe whatever is going to be given to you. So always check your biases, always check the output, always check those results, because it can get it wrong, and often it does.
Yeah, we haven't talked as much on the workflow and productivity improvements, because I think, for Hillary and I, we've mostly been looking at the application and gameplay a lot more. But one thing I will say I found, and I'm not sure if you found this as well too, is even though that was not what our mission was, by integrating this technology into our workflow, so it's in engine, we can iterate in engine, we have live tools to, while the game is running, to be able to modify or manipulate the machine learning that we do. We did see productivity improvements. So we conceptualized and shipped Retail Mage in 5 months. I would not recommend that pace for anyone, but it was also incredible. I wasn't quite sure we could do it. And, but a lot of that was because, it's hard to come up with a good example, but the tool and the medium start to merge a little bit, right? So in a way that, if you're familiar with Unreal and you have blueprints and you're like, oh, I can script now, and that means I'm gonna go faster. Well, suddenly when you're using language as a core part of the programming that you have a more creative medium that's more responsive. And so all the things you can do on demand in real time, those become tools for you as a designer and potentially tools for players in UGC context, even if you did not intend that to be the case.
We also have this ability to take we just did a deal where someone approached us, we read their book, and then had a playable story game up and running in a couple hours as a first draft, and that is entirely because of the way we have designed the platform and the technology, in that if our system understands a romance or a meet cute or a heist, it is very easy for us then to bring it into a new world. And that is something completely unique to this tech. So I think it is, we can do cool stuff. It's not really about exactly doing what somebody might have done before without it, but cheaper and faster. I will also say, as a CEO who writes a lot of code, I love programming with tools that help. We have a principle on our team that everyone is responsible for the code they put up under their name, which means that if you use the tool and you don't understand it, you are going to bear the brunt of your colleagues' fury and the psychic damage. And that has, I think, led to a really healthy culture of people having a lot of fun, but also keeping it used for the purposes for which it is really helpful. I wouldn't be here saying I think it has led to a 30% gain in our team productivity, because it's not that. But there are areas where I always get mocked because I almost never wrote a good test coverage for the code I contributed. I'm I have a lot of other things to do. This is not my highest priority. I know it's bad software engineering, but now I can vibe code some unit tests. I read them, I'm good enough. And that makes everybody happier. So there are these, I'm gonna say the human and teamwork side of it is really important to do it well. If you go into your engineering team and you're hey, everybody use AI programming tools, you are probably gonna get laughed out of the room, I hope. But there are ways to bring them in that is really fun.
Until most of your senior programmers then just name a model Frank, and then you go and do code check. Like, why is Frank like contributing like 60% more? Who the hell is Frank? And how did he make his way into this damn company? Because this stuff, I don't understand what happened here. So don't do that, because Hillary will find out. Where have you seen kind of those impacts, those positive impacts in accelerating development timelines? But again, it's not replacing programmers, artists, these sorts of things. Where have we seen customers utilize tools and services that we provide to enable that?
I mean, we work at Amazon, right? We're a massive company. We have all this internal knowledge bases that are just all over the place. You know, we have these silos of data that some people have access to, some people don't have access to, but sometimes I want the information that I don't have access to, or somebody else, is able to like tell me, right? But we need to be able to respect these rules and have intelligent agents that, definitively respect those rules, so that we can have some sort of productivity gain. So I think that's like one of the main things that I've seen in that it's not necessarily like games specific, but in general for all enterprises, there's a need for recalling information and have it be contextually aware and accurate, and that's led to a pretty large productivity boost, at least for myself, working at Amazon.
So I'm going to ask one more question. We want to go ahead and open up with the time that we have for you to ask questions that you have of these incredibly brilliant panelists. So the last question I have, do we have a mic for people to use, or is it this one? All right, then it's this one. So I'm going to borrow this one, and I'm going to give you this one. Thank you, thank you. Can we use AI for everything? Like, where is it? What areas would AI not necessarily be most beneficial with the current tools and kind of services that we have today? Where are some areas that you may just not want to look at using AI tools? Is it, again, good for everything, or are there places you should avoid?
See, I was going to answer that question differently, so I might need to think about this, because what I was thinking about is where to apply it in the game design side, actually, because what we found, we steal a game design idea from the tabletop industry of rulings, not rules. And so if we think that games are primarily rule-based engines, when we think about things, we have heuristics and probability and things like that. What we think we add to is where it's useful is when you want a ruling, more of a judgment, rather than a rule. So, in a narrative context, if they're like going to jump over the cliff, instead of it being a physics calculation or something else, it's like, what's narratively interesting, right? Should they be able to like jump over and barely escape? Should they trip and fall? Should they fall down, right? And when you can make those kind of judgment calls because of the pacing of the game, because of where you're driving, what the goals of the players are, now you're doing something different. And so I think that's one area where, so consequently, what's wrong, and actually an early part of iteration on Retail Mage was we thought of it initially as kind of an escape room problem. And what we found was logic problems just aren't interesting in that way. We can do logic puzzles so well. Why would I use AI to make logic puzzles, right? So it's, again, like learning how to apply the technology.
Has anyone played Blueprints?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. A perfect example of maybe AI can't do this. Right? Because
or it doesn't do it necessarily better or
Right.
unique in a way that's valuable. Yeah.
That was a perfect answer. So I will go in a different direction, which is to say that I think there is this hope that AI can run companies, and the things that you cannot replace are the human parts of it, like really thinking about who are my players, what is the community like, talking to people, talking to your teammates, understanding what's working and not working. And as much as I would love to, like, I went into computer science because I didn't want to talk to people, and then discovered that you can't do anything interesting unless it's all about talking to people and working with people, and that is still very much true. And so it is not the people side of things that you should be thinking about this in. Like, we've already built in many large corporations this whole layer of KPIs and product metrics, and that is useful, but it is not a substitute for really having excellent empathy.
one area of the people side of things, we think about AI tools for things like localization, okay? But there is a very, very real difference between translation and localization.
Yeah.
AI, fantastic for translation. It is not localization. colloquialisms, social norms, religious issues, like all of these things that are part of human communication and societal structure. That is not what AI does. So understand the limitations of the tools that you're using, right? Have your own guardrails as you're using them.
Yeah. All right.
Yes.
I'm going to give the facetious answer, right? AI is never going to replace the players, the fans. We're going to use this stuff to make really awesome experiences for humans. We're not doing it for agents. So
That's not facetious. It's because it's humans that matter, right?
Exactly,
Like,
exactly.
That's actually very beautiful.
Yeah, no, that is a perfect. I love that answer. I'm going to give a little applause for that because it is about the people that are playing. All right, what questions do we have for our panelists here? Anybody have any questions about the work that they're doing, about recommendations for the type of tools that you're using? How can we help you and serve you today?
Thank you. So I'm Faraz. I'm a producer. So I'm in games production and a product manager. So I think a lot about product positioning. And I know, as for Aaron at least, a game that is widely playable. So I guess the question is more to you. How do you manage perceptions of AI? Because I think it can be very. I want to say it's prickly. The issue of asset generation. And versus other kinds of generation versus using AI to create novel gameplay. So how do you manage like user perception, whether that's like players on Steam or like elsewhere, in your marketing kind of considerations for your product?
Yeah. So we don't hide that we use AI, but we look. We're game makers, right? I have way too many games on my Steam library. No player is going to play not no player, because there's weird players out there, but no player is going to play a game just because it's AI, right, or generative AI, right? They're going to play a game because it's fun, good experience. That's what I have to communicate to them. And so that, and that's so I think you just have this honest conversation with them. You position it. There are some people who it does not matter how amazing the game is. If I've used generative AI, they're already cut me off. But then, there's players that cut things off for games for all sorts of reasons. So I think we just have an honest communication. Part of the reason that I decided to go in this space was, because I also thought the tech was cool, and I thought we could make things that I've always wanted to make, but also because I want to be part of the conversation of creating the future of this industry and engaging with it instead of letting it happen to me. Right, and so I think that's the other way that I'm trying to present like what we're doing, why we're doing it, is because it's this. This isn't going to happen to us. That's not an excuse, right? So how are we going to leverage this technology to make the kind of industry that we want to live in, the kind of play experiences and joy and that we want to have?
Yeah, I just want to add to that because yes, and like there is nothing we do at our company that I'm not proud of and not happy to talk about, obviously. And also, I think when you take the time to explain what does it actually mean? How do you work with writers and movie producers? Like, do they get paid? Okay, like that makes sense. Like, oh, you're using this thing for this thing. That makes sense. Like, people do come along. And we are in this moment in this industry where there is a very loud, small doom collective, and there's a very loud, bit larger, I think, hype side. None of that actually matters. It is building this pragmatic middle, and this is why I'm here, like excited to talk about this stuff, because we need people doing this to show what it looks like to do it well or in a way that we're proud of. And there are plenty of people who are really happy to go around being like, yeah, I'm happy to exploit my artists. Isn't that great? And there are plenty of people on the other side being like, AI is a god and it's going to replace us all and it's nihilism or whatever. So what do we do to actually build the world we want to be working in and living in? And it's sort of saying like, okay, here's what it actually is. Here's what we're actually doing with it. This is why we think it is ethical and good. And this is how the business works. And if you don't like it, that's fine. You're entitled to that opinion. Like, it doesn't hurt my feelings. But it is being really honest about it.
If we could also just make one other comment about the use of these types of tools. Here's the secret. We've been using these tools for like 45 years in the games industry, right? SpeedTree builds trees and topography based on these same type of machine learning algorithms. Bot swarming and pathfinding and collision, like all these things. What we're experiencing now is the hyperextension of those things and the accessibility of them by people that have never touched those types of tools before. But the reality is, in the games industry, we've been working with very similar types of models for literally decades. So I do think the answer is in the middle. It's not at the extremes, it's in the mean.
Yes, but also the math is the same, but this is the first time that we have positioned the technology to use people's information without their knowledge or permission, and to replace their labor in a market. So it is actually worth calling that out.
Oh, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
I believe me. Go check out my LinkedIn post. You will not see me. You will not see me making that argument at all. Without you, none of these tools matter, right? It is still about art. It is still about art for each other. So yes, 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 all day long. Yes.
Okay. All right. Hunting Buckley, I lead strategy for Databricks for games. And you said something, Hillary, that I found really interesting. You intimated learning from the prompts of players, and then you were just talking about learning from that. How do you go about learning from it, but what do you do with that information? How are you changing your experiences as a result of what you see at scale? Because you're at scale.
Yeah, we've been in a preview mode, so we have, thousands of people sending us stuff. No, it's a scale, but I want to put it in perspective, right? Because we can read it. It is still at human scale. And for us, to be clear, in our experience, you are not writing a prompt to an LLM. You are you're in a character. You have a character sheet, and you're like, oh, my challenge is to survive this panel and not say anything too embarrassing. So I do this, right? And it is that I do this that we look at, because it's what are they trying to do? It's to your point, how did we decide narratively what's most interesting that could come out of this? Did we say it was easy or hard correctly? Did we classify it as oh, the thing you're trying to do is an attack, and therefore we're going to go down that path, versus you're trying to placate or negotiate, right? So we're going to go down a different path. So for us, it is really understanding what do people want and what makes the experience for them, and then what brings them back. If they start a story and they leave after 3 turns, what happened that made them leave? Why did they quit? And then that's entirely a process of looking at it and trying to imagine, why would this be frustrating, or why would I walk away from this? So it's mostly that sort of stuff.
We do use player-generated data from larger models to fine-tune smaller models. Is one of the things that we do, right? So it's an optimization step. Yep. There's a huge problem or topic that we don't have time to get into around how do you intuit player intent, and there's some interesting technology in this space or things to do, and the other part is something I'm forgetting, and I'll follow up with you later.
Okay, this is the last session of the day. And we've made the executive decision. We're going over, so we can answer your questions. So let's go.
All right.
Drag us
Great.
screaming out of here. Go.
Okay, so this is actually going to be a question for Ashwin and actually Chris. So people are talking about the ethics of generative AI, and I just want to point out, for example, that Adobe's Firefly is trained entirely on data that Adobe owns, because they own a huge image library, and they've purchased image libraries and used that as a training data set. So it's completely clean. You can use it ethically. The perception problem is different, but you can use it ethically. The question I have for you guys, as one of the big, giant, mega, huge, immense AI companies, is have you looked at, and actually full disclosure, I'm a big AI proponent, but also the person named in the big lawsuit, Richard Kadri, is a friend of mine. So have you considered looking at the possibility of solving the valuation of input and tying it to generative output problem using blockchain ownership and crypto PICO payments in order to redress the ethical issue of essentially what people are calling stolen content?
That's all the time we have for in this this panel here. I want to no. In all seriousness, now you're bringing in 3 or 4 separate, discrete pieces of technology. Everything from having distributed ledger to make sure that we are making sure that the transaction is actually what it should be. We also know that there are ways to spoof that in the chain, or to go ahead and spoof hashes and things of that nature. So there's a lot of big problems there. However, there are, I believe, at least one of the models that are available on Bedrock, right, has indemnification framing around it, right? The platforms that we operate, right, the services that we run, other companies bring their models, not just their models, but all sorts of businesses and operations and innovation to run on our platform. Those are things that we don't have control over. Okay, so I can't speak to those other companies. I can't speak to, you know, what any of those other partners are doing. I think that overall, just as an industry, just we have to be aware about what is coming in and how we use it and how we can advise our customers and our partners to best effect. We don't get to necessarily control those things, right? But again, a much deeper conversation about how we would use that to authenticate all the data coming in. Big compute on the back end for that, and I'm happy to go ahead and have the conversation with you, which is, again, we could have another 2 hours on it. That may not suffice for a full answer for you, but that's the answer I've got for you, right? Do you have anything else to add there?
I think you said it best.
Okay, awesome. I want to thank our panelists here today. I want to thank Desiree. I want to thank GameSpeed Summit. I want to thank you all for taking time and for your awesome questions. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.